The galaxy was vast, and its capital, a sprawling city filled with alien species from every corner of the universe, was a symbol of its power and beauty. The city floated high above a beautiful green planet, with countless stars twinkling in the sky. From its shining towers to its bustling streets, the capital was the heart of an empire that controlled multiple worlds. Princess Lyra had seen many things in her short life. As the only daughter of the queen, she was used to grandeur, used to the eyes of the galaxy upon her, but today there was something different in the air. There was a quiet excitement among the officials, something Lyra could feel but couldn't quite place. She stood in the grand hall of the royal palace, her golden gown flowing as she moved. The hall was filled with diplomats from every species, each more elegant and mysterious than the last. The air buzzed with the sound of alien languages and hushed conversations about important matters, alliances, territories, trade agreements. The queen, her mother, stood at the front, her voice commanding, her presence as powerful as the empire she ruled. But as Lyra watched her mother, her eyes were drawn to something else. Someone else. A human. He stood at the back of the room, looking, completely out of place in the sea of alien diplomats. His name was Jackson, a diplomat from Earth, and he was here on a mission. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a simple, yet formal suit. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his eyes, bright and clear, seemed to take in everything at once. His expression was calm, but there was a quiet intensity in the way he observed the room. To Lyra, he was like a puzzle she wanted to solve. There was something different about him, something that made her curious. His presence didn't scream power or prestige, but it carried a quiet strength. The way he stood there, observing, as if he had seen far worse and wasn't intimidated by anything. It wasn't just his appearance that caught Lyra's attention. It was something deeper, something that made her heart beat a little faster. She couldn't explain it. In a room full of powerful beings, it was this human who stood out to her. As the queen began to speak, Lyra felt the pull of Jackson's gaze. She quickly turned her attention back to her mother, but the image of him lingered in her mind. The queen's voice echoed through the hall. Today, we celebrate unity, the strength of our empire, and the future of our many worlds, she said, her tone firm and commanding. We welcome our guests from Earth who have shown great interest in joining our coalition of planets. But let us not forget our own people, our own strength. The queen's speech was long, but Lyra's mind wandered. She couldn't help but glance back at Jackson, still standing at the edge of the crowd. He hadn't moved, still observing everything, quietly, almost as though he was unsure of his place among them. Lyra found herself wondering what kind of person he was. Humans were a young species, newly discovered and still growing in the galaxy. They weren't as advanced as some of the older species, but there was something about their drive, their ambition that intrigued others. Lyra had heard the stories, how humans had overcome countless challenges on their own world, how they fought with passion and fought for what they believed in. And yet, here he was, standing among beings that were centuries older than his kind, holding his own, not looking intimidated. The queen finished her speech and the crowd began to disperse, moving to their assigned places for discussions and negotiations. Lyra, still lost in her thoughts, found herself moving toward Jackson. She didn't know why, but something inside her urged her forward. When she reached him, Jackson turned to face her. He smiled politely, but there was a certain warmth in his eyes, as if he wasn't just seeing a royal princess, but someone he could actually talk to. "Princess Lyra," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It's an honor to meet you." Lyra was taken aback for a moment. She had expected a more formal greeting, something that showed his awe of her position. But there was no hesitation in his voice, no trace of fear. He looked at her as if they were equals. It was strange, but in a way it was refreshing. "The honor is mine," Lyra replied, her voice smooth. She noticed that his eyes didn't flinch when he met her gaze. Most people did, but not him. It was as if he wasn't bothered by her status or the weight of the empire on her shoulders. "I didn't expect to meet you so soon," Jackson continued, his smile growing a little more genuine. I heard stories of your strength, your intelligence. I can see they were true. Lyra felt a warmth rise in her cheeks, but she quickly masked it with a smile of her own. And I've heard about Earth, she said. A young planet, full of promise. I'm curious about your species, Jackson. Tell me, what drives you humans? Jackson's eyes sparkled for a moment as he thought about the question. We fight for what we believe in, he said. For what we love, for each other. No matter how small we are in the grand scheme of things, we never back down from a fight, even when the odds are stacked against us. Lyra listened closely. She had heard similar things before, but coming from him, it sounded different. His words weren't just a speech. They felt real. Before she could respond, the Queen appeared behind her, her expression cool and measured. Lyra, she said, her voice filled with authority. It's time for you to join the negotiations, Jackson. I trust you'll be joining us as well? Jackson nodded, giving Lyra one last glance before turning to face the Queen. Of course. Your Majesty. The Queen's eyes lingered on him for a moment, her gaze sharp and assessing. She said nothing, but Lyra could tell that she didn't quite trust Jackson yet. There was something about him that seemed to make her mother uneasy, though she couldn't figure out why. As they walked toward the negotiation hall, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She had met many diplomats, many people who had come to the capital with promises of alliances, but none of them had affected her the way Jackson had. There was something more to him, something she couldn't ignore. And as the doors to the negotiation hall closed behind them, Lyra made a silent promise to herself. She would find out what it was. The days that followed the royal summit were busy ones. The negotiations between the various galactic factions continued, with diplomats and leaders meeting in the grand chambers of the palace, discussing alliances, trade routes, and military strategies. Princess Lyra, as usual, was expected to attend these discussions, her mother's shadow guiding her every move. But despite the constant flow of meetings and ceremonies, Lyra couldn't stop thinking about one thing, one person. Jackson. He had been a quiet presence at the summit, observing everything with a calmness that intrigued her. But when he spoke, his words were always meaningful, always thoughtful. He wasn't just here for the political talks, she realized. He was here to make a difference. In the days after the summit, Lyra found herself seeking out Jackson more and more. During quiet moments in the palace gardens when the bustle of political affairs calmed, she would find him wandering, his eyes lost in thought, perhaps contemplating the vastness of the galaxy, or maybe just trying to understand his place in it all. It was one of these moments when their paths crossed again. Lyra had finished her duties for the day and was walking through the quiet garden, enjoying the cool evening air. The stars above shimmered, casting a peaceful glow over the palace grounds. She was lost in her own thoughts when she spotted Jackson, sitting by a small fountain, his fingers tracing the edge of the stone. Jackson, she called, her voice soft but clear. He looked up, a slight smile spreading across his face when he saw her. Princess, he greeted, standing up to acknowledge her. I didn't expect to see you here. I could say the same, Lyra replied, her lips curling into a small smile. What are you doing out here all alone? Jackson shrugged, his gaze shifting to the stars above. I find peace here. The galaxy is full of noise, but sometimes it's nice to sit in silence. It helps me think. Lyra nodded, understanding more than he might have realized. As a royal, her life was often filled with noise, expectations, duties, and constant attention. The peace of the garden was a rare gift. Thinking about Earth? She asked, taking a few steps closer, her curiosity growing. Among other things, Jackson replied with a faint grin. I guess you could say I'm thinking about how strange it is to be here. On Earth, we had to fight for everything we have, even for the chance to explore the stars. But here it seems like the galaxy is already set. Everything has its place. And you feel out of place? Lyra asked, her voice gentle. Jackson met her eyes. Maybe, he said slowly. But I think that's where the real change starts, don't you think? In places where you don't belong, in places where you're an outsider, that's where the biggest shifts can happen. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. There was something about his words that resonated with her. She had spent her life surrounded by the same rules, the same traditions. The thought of change, of breaking free from the old ways, was something she had never fully considered before. But here, in front of her, was someone who wasn't afraid of that challenge. Someone who believed in the possibility of change, no matter how unlikely it seemed. "What kind of change do you think is possible?" she asked, her curiosity growing. Jackson thought for a moment, then looked directly at her. "I think that change comes when people stop seeing each other as threats or enemies, when they start seeing the potential in each other, no matter their species, no matter where they come from. I think that's the key to peace in the galaxy." Lyra stared at him, taking in his words. There was something powerful about his simplicity. In a world filled with complex politics and centuries-old grudges, his view seemed so clear. She had spent her entire life trying to keep peace among worlds, trying to balance the needs of her people with the demands of others. But Jackson's words made her question everything. Could the galaxy truly find peace if they started seeing each other differently? Before she could respond, Jackson stood up, dusting off his clothes. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on like that," he said with a laugh, brushing off the seriousness of the moment. "I guess I'm just tired of the politics. I know I'm here to represent Earth, but sometimes I wonder if I'm doing it right." Lyra smiled, finding his self-doubt strangely endearing. "I think you're doing just fine," she said, her voice soft. "More than most." Jackson chuckled. "Thanks. But I'm still learning. There's so much I don't know." Lyra nodded, sensing the sincerity in his voice. She found herself wanting to know more about him, about his world, his thoughts, and what drove him to be so different from the other diplomats she'd met. She'd never met anyone quite like him before, and that alone made him impossible to forget. Over the following days, Lyra and Jackson spent more time together. Their conversations drifted from topics of politics to more personal matters, like their dreams and their hopes for the future. Lyra discovered that Jackson wasn't just a diplomat. He was someone who believed in the idea of a better future for everyone, no matter how impossible it seemed. He spoke of Earth with a kind of longing, but also with pride, remembering the struggles of his people and how they had fought to overcome them. But it wasn't just his words that kept Lyra coming back. It was the way he made her feel. When they were together, it was as if the weight of her royal duties didn't matter. For the first time in her life, she felt like she could be herself, without the expectations of the Empire hanging over her. Jackson didn't treat her like a princess. He treated her like an equal. As the days passed, Lyra's feelings for Jackson deepened. She couldn't explain it. It wasn't just his intelligence or his bravery or his unwavering belief in the possibility of change. It was everything. The way he looked at her when they spoke. The way his smile made her feel like the galaxy was full of endless possibilities. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Lyra found herself standing at the edge of the royal gardens once more, waiting for Jackson. He was late, but she didn't mind. She could already feel the familiar flutter of anticipation in her chest as she thought about their next conversation. But this time, something felt different. As the stars twinkled above, Lyra realized that she was no longer just curious about Jackson. She wasn't just fascinated by him or intrigued by his words. She was starting to care for him, deeply. And though she knew it was dangerous, though she knew the consequences of crossing the lines her mother had drawn, she couldn't help the way she felt. Jackson was the first person who had ever made her feel like there was more to her life than the Empire, and that scared her, but it also made her want to take a chance she had never allowed herself before. It was only a matter of time before the Queen noticed the growing connection between her daughter and the human diplomat. Lyra knew that the day would come when her mother would question her feelings, but she hadn't expected it to happen so soon. The Grand Palace had an air of tension one morning, as Lyra was summoned to meet her mother in the royal chambers. The room, filled with rich tapestries and the smell of old wood, always seemed imposing, as if the walls themselves were watching her every move. But today the tension felt even heavier than usual. The queen stood by the large window staring out at the city below, her posture as regal as ever. "Lyra," the queen said, her voice cold but controlled. "Come here." Lyra approached, her heart racing, unsure of what this conversation would bring. She had already anticipated what was coming, but the weight of her mother's gaze still made her feel uneasy. "You've been spending a lot of time with Jackson, haven't you?" the queen asked, her tone sharper than Lyra expected. Lyra nodded. "Yes, mother. He's been a great help with the negotiations, and we've had some interesting conversations." The queen turned to face her, her eyes narrowing. "Conversations?" she repeated, her voice laced with suspicion. "Lyra, you are a princess. Your duty is to the Empire, not to some human diplomat. Humans are still new to the galaxy, untested. They're not worthy of our trust, let alone our affections." Lyra felt her chest tighten at her mother's words. She knew where this was going, but it didn't make it easier to hear. "Jackson is different, mother. He's not like the other diplomats we've met. He's intelligent, brave. He understands things in ways that others don't." The queen's eyes flashed with annoyance. "You speak of him as though he's already proven himself. But you're blinded by his charm, Lyra. You mustn't let your heart make decisions for you. As a princess, you have a responsibility to the galaxy, to your people. And that responsibility doesn't include entertaining relationships with outsiders." Lyra's mind raced. She had never questioned her mother's authority before, but now in the face of these words she felt a sense of rebellion building inside her. Why did everything in her life have to be about duty? Why couldn't she choose for herself? She had always done what was expected of her, but in Jackson's presence she felt like she could finally be herself. No royal titles, no expectations. "I don't think I'm blinded by anything, mother," Lyra said quietly, but with more confidence than she had expected. "Jackson is not like the others. He's different. I feel understood when I'm with him." The queen's expression darkened. "And I am your mother, Lyra. I have lived longer than you, seen more of the galaxy, and I have never once let emotions cloud my judgment. I know what's best for you, and I will not allow you to make a fool of yourself." Lyra stood tall, though her heart was heavy with the weight of her mother's words. "You've always told me to make decisions based on what's best for the Empire. But what if this is what's best for me?" The queen was silent for a long moment. The tension in the room grew thick, but Lyra held her ground. She had always respected her mother, but now she was beginning to question whether the path her mother had set for her was truly the one she wanted to follow. "Lyra, this isn't about what's best for you," the queen said, her voice colder. "Now, it's about what's best for the galaxy. Your emotions will only bring chaos. They will weaken you." "I don't think they will," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. She hadn't meant to sound so vulnerable, but the weight of the conversation was overwhelming. The queen's eyes softened for just a moment, but then she turned away, the cold mask returning to her face. "You'll understand in time. I won't allow you to jeopardize the future of this empire. You must end your friendship with Jackson. It's for the good of all of us." Lyra stood there, rooted to the spot, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to say. The love she felt for Jackson was real. But her mother's words echoed in her mind. Duty, loyalty, the future of the Empire. Was she really willing to risk everything for this one human? For someone who wasn't even part of the galaxy's future, as far as her mother was concerned? "Do you understand?" the queen asked, her voice now softer, but still firm. Lyra swallowed hard. She didn't understand. Not fully. She had spent her life listening to the queen, obeying her every command, but for the first time she felt torn. This was about more than just Jackson. It was about her own future, her own choice. "Yes, mother," Lyra finally said, though her heart wasn't in it. She bowed her head, masking the storm of emotions inside her. "I understand." But as she left the Queen's chambers, her resolve began to fade. The Queen had commanded her to end things with Jackson, but Lyra couldn't bring herself to do it. She didn't know how. The connection between her and Jackson had only grown stronger over the past few days. He had become more than just a diplomat to her. He had become someone who made her feel alive in a way the royal duties never had. As she walked down the marble halls of the palace, Lyra's mind raced. How could she face Jackson now? She didn't want to hurt him. But if she followed her mother's wishes, she would have to. She could feel the weight of her mother's expectations on her shoulders, pushing her toward a future she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. The next evening, after a long day of official meetings, Lyra found herself back in the palace garden. The cool air brushed against her skin, the stars twinkling overhead. She was alone, but her thoughts were crowded with the conflict inside her. And then, as if fate had intervened, she saw him. Jackson was sitting by the fountain again, just as he had before. His eyes lifted when he saw her approach, and he smiled, warmly. The smile that always made her heart race. "Princess," he said, standing up. "I was hoping I might see you again." Lyra stood still for a moment, her heart pounding. She knew she had to make a decision, and as she met Jackson's gaze, she realized that no matter what her mother wanted, no matter the expectations placed upon her, she couldn't let go of what she had with him. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I've decided I don't want to let this go." Jackson's eyes softened, and for a moment the rest of the galaxy faded away. It was just the two of them. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "I'll stand by you no matter what." Lyra knew then that she had made her choice. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she was ready to face it on her own terms. The days after Lyra's decision were filled with tension. The Queen's command weighed heavily on her, but she had chosen her path, and now there was no turning back. She and Jackson continued to meet in secret, stealing moments away from the watchful eyes of the royal palace. Their conversations had become deeper, more meaningful. They spoke about their hopes for the future, their dreams for a galaxy where species could live in harmony, without the endless wars and old grudges that had torn so many apart. But even as Lyra found herself drawn closer to Jackson, the unrest within the Empire grew stronger. Whispers of rebellion began to spread through the palace. It started as small rumors, quiet conversations between the lower officials, the servants, and the soldiers. But soon it became clear that something larger was happening. One evening, as Lyra walked through the royal gardens, her thoughts consumed by Jackson, she was stopped by one of the palace's guards, his face grim. "Princess Lyra," he said, bowing slightly. "There's news. The Empire is in danger." "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart pounding in her chest. "A faction of the Empire's military is planning to rebel," the guard explained. "They believe the Queen's rule is too old-fashioned, too focused on the old ways. They think the galaxy needs change, and they've been rallying support. They want to take control." Lyra's mind raced. She had heard the rumblings of dissatisfaction among the people, but this was different. A rebellion. Open rebellion against the Queen? It was unthinkable, and yet here it was, growing stronger by the day. "Where is the Queen?" Lyra asked, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "She's preparing for the worst," the guard said. "But Princess, I think you need to know this is not just about the Queen anymore. It's about the future of the Empire." Lyra's heart sank. She knew what the guard meant. This rebellion wasn't just a fight for power. It was a fight for the future. And in the middle of it all stood her, the heir to the throne. She could no longer hide behind her mother's decisions. The choice was now hers, and the weight of it pressed down on her. That night, Lyra could not sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, the stars visible through the open window. Her thoughts were consumed by the rebellion and the dangerous path it would lead them down. She couldn't ignore it. She couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. The galaxy was changing, and whether she was ready for it or not, she had to be a part of it. She thought of Jackson, the human who had opened her eyes to the possibility of a better future. A future where humans, aliens, and all species could work together, not just for survival, but for something greater. Her mind made up. Lyra got up from her bed and quickly dressed in her dark royal cloak. She slipped out of her chambers and into the palace's quiet halls. No one saw her as she made her way to the secret meeting room, the one place where she and Jackson could speak freely. It was a small, hidden space behind the royal library, far away from the prying eyes of the palace's servants. Jackson was already waiting for her when she arrived. His eyes lit up when he saw her, but there was a seriousness in his expression that mirrored the storm inside her. "What's wrong, Lyra?" he asked softly. "You look troubled." Lyra took a deep breath, steadying herself. "There's a rebellion. It's happening now. The Empire is at war with itself." Jackson's expression hardened. "I thought something was off. I've heard rumors, but I didn't know it had gotten this bad." "I can't just sit back and do nothing," Lyra said, her voice firm. "My mother, she won't see what's happening. She won't change the way things are. The galaxy needs something new, something better. I can't be part of an empire that is stuck in the past." Jackson stepped closer, his eyes softening. "You don't have to do it alone, Lyra. You never have to. I'll stand by you." Lyra felt a surge of relief but also a deep sense of fear. This wasn't just about her. The fate of the Empire, the galaxy itself, rested on the choices she made now. She had to decide whether to remain loyal to her mother, to the old ways, or to stand with Jackson and the rebels who believed in a new future. She met his gaze, her heart racing. "Then let's fight for that future. Together." The next day, Lyra made the decision to confront her mother. She couldn't ignore the rebellion any longer. She couldn't pretend that everything was fine. The Queen had always taught her that duty came first. But Lyra had learned something else in her time, with Jackson. Duty wasn't just about following orders, it was about doing what was right even when it was hard, even when it meant challenging the very foundation of everything she had been taught. She found the Queen in her private chambers, staring out the window at the vast city below. Lyra took a deep breath, walking in without waiting for an invitation. "Mother," she began, her voice steady, "I know about the rebellion." The Queen's back stiffened at the mention of it, but she didn't turn around. "I've heard the rumors," she said, her voice cold. "But we will not be swayed by them. We will put down this uprising and everything will return to normal." Lyra shook her head. "No, it won't. Things can't go back to the way they were. We have to change." The Queen's eyes narrowed as she finally turned to face her. "Change? What are you talking about, Lyra? This rebellion is nothing more than a childish attempt to upset the balance we fought for. The Empire needs stability. The Empire needs a future," Lyra shot back, her voice full of conviction. "And it's not one that's built on old traditions and endless war. We need to find a way to work together, not against each other. The galaxy is ready for change, but only if we're brave enough to make it." The Queen's expression hardened, but Lyra saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. It was a brief moment, but it was there. "You are still young, Lyra," the Queen said, her voice quieter now. "You think you understand, but you don't. There's more at stake here than you realize." "I understand more than you think," Lyra replied softly. "I'm not the child you once knew. I've seen what's possible, and I won't let fear hold me back anymore." The Queen didn't answer right away, her gaze cold and calculating. But finally she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Then go," she said, her voice bitter. "Go and join them. But know this. If you choose to leave this empire behind, you will never return. The galaxy will never see you the same way again." Lyra stood tall, her decision final. "Then so be it." She turned and walked away, her heart heavy with the weight of her choice, but also light with the hope that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where she could finally fight for what was right. The decision had been made. Lyra stood in the quiet of her chambers, staring at the vast expanse of the galaxy through the palace's grand window. The stars twinkled in the distance, the same stars she had gazed at for years. But tonight they felt different. They felt like a challenge, a reminder of the unknown that lay ahead. She had made her choice. She had chosen to fight for a future she believed in, a future where things could be different, where peace and cooperation would rule the galaxy instead of fear and division. But as she prepared to leave the palace, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Her mother's cold words echoed in her mind, the threat of losing everything she had ever known. The Queen had been clear. If Lyra joined the rebels, there would be no turning back. The Empire would never see her the same way again. The Queen, her own mother, would never forgive her, and yet Lyra was resolute. She had spent years following her mother's wishes, trying to live up to the impossible standards of royalty. But now she understood something crucial. She understood that real change could only come from within. It couldn't come from old traditions, from the heavy crown of the past. It had to come from people who were willing to take risks to face the unknown. As she made her way through the palace halls, the weight of her decision felt lighter with each step. She no longer felt like a prisoner to her title, to her mother's expectations. She was free, but that freedom came at a price. The future of the Empire and her relationship with her mother was now uncertain. The rebellion was already underway, and it was only a matter of time before everything erupted. Lyra had met with the leaders of the insurgency, the ones who believed that the old ways of the Empire could no longer hold up in a changing galaxy. They weren't just rebels. They were visionaries, people who saw the future and knew that the Empire had to change to survive. And for the first time in her life, Lyra felt like she had found a place where she truly belonged, a place where her voice could make a difference. Jackson had been by her side through it all. His quiet confidence and unwavering support had helped her navigate the chaos. He had never pushed her, never told her what to do. He had only stood by her, ready to face whatever came next. They had met in secret, away from the palace's watchful eyes. In their hidden meeting room, Lyra and Jackson spoke of the future they wanted to create together. A future where the galaxy would no longer be divided by politics and power struggles, but instead united by common goals and mutual respect. Jackson believed in her. He believed in the change she could bring, and that belief had fueled Lyra's determination. But that night, as they sat together in the quiet of the palace gardens, Lyra knew that the time for secrecy was coming to an end. The rebellion was only going to grow stronger. The Queen would not sit idly by while the future of the Empire was threatened. "We need to act," Lyra said softly, her voice carrying the weight of her decision. "I can't wait any longer. I need to take a stand." Jackson looked at her, his expression serious but full of understanding. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Once we do this, there's no turning back." "I know," Lyra replied, her voice steady. "But I can't keep living in the shadows. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. The galaxy needs change, Jackson, and I'm the one who has to make it happen." Jackson took her hand in his, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Then I'm with you, Lyra. I always have been." Lyra smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you." The next morning, Lyra gathered her courage and walked to the Queen's chambers. Her mother's presence was still as powerful as ever, but today, it felt different. Lyra wasn't the same person who had entered those chambers weeks ago. She had grown stronger, more determined. She knew what she had to do. As she entered the room, the Queen turned to face her, her sharp gaze softening just slightly when she saw her daughter. But there was still a coldness in her eyes, a distance that Lyra hadn't noticed before. "Lyra," the Queen said, her voice filled with a mixture of concern and authority, "I trust you've thought about this decision. You understand what it means?" Lyra nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I understand, Mother, but I've made my choice." The Queen's face tightened and she took a step forward. "You're making a grave mistake. You think you can change the galaxy by joining the rebels? You think that turning against your own people will lead to anything but chaos?" "I don't think it will lead to chaos," Lyra replied calmly. "I think it will lead to a new beginning. a chance for all of us to work together to build something better. The Empire's way of ruling is over. The galaxy is ready for change. The Queen's expression was unreadable. She studied her daughter, for a long moment as if weighing her every word. Finally she spoke, her voice low and tight with emotion. "If you choose this path, Lyra, you will be alone. I cannot protect you anymore. You will lose everything. The throne, the Empire, our people. Your name will be tarnished forever." Lyra stood tall, meeting her mother's gaze without hesitation. "I'm ready to lose it all if it means fighting for something better." The Queen's eyes flashed with anger, but there was also something else there, something that Lyra couldn't quite place. It was a brief moment, but in it, Lyra saw a flicker of doubt. For a second, it felt as if her mother might change her mind. But then the Queen's expression hardened again, the mask of power returning to her face. "You have made your choice," the Queen said, her voice cold, "and now you must live with the consequences." Lyra nodded, her heart heavy, but also full of resolve. "I will." With those final words, Lyra turned and walked away. As she stepped out of the Queen's chambers, she felt the weight of her decision settle over her. The future of the galaxy was now in her hands. As Lyra made her way through the palace halls, her thoughts were a mix of hope and fear. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if the rebellion would succeed, or if the Queen would crush it before it could take root. But one thing was certain, Lyra had chosen her own path. She would fight for what she believed in, no matter the cost. And with Jackson by her side, she knew that she wasn't alone. The day had come. The day Lyra had both feared and hoped for. She had made her choice, and now there was no turning back. The rebellion was growing stronger, and the stakes had never been higher. Every corner of the Empire was buzzing with unrest, and whispers of change filled the air. The Queen's forces were preparing to crush the insurgents, but Lyra knew that the time for fighting would soon be upon them. There would be no more waiting, no more hiding in the shadows. Lyra stood by the window of her chambers, watching the sun rise over the distant horizon. The stars from the night before had faded, leaving behind a sky of soft pinks and oranges. It was a beautiful sight, one that had comforted her many times throughout her life. But today, it felt different. Today, the sky felt like a promise, like the future was waiting for her to reach out and grab it. Behind her, she heard a soft knock on the door. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Jackson had been by her side every step of the way, and today was no different. As the door creaked open, she felt his presence beside her, steady and reassuring. "It's almost time," he said, his voice low and calm. Lyra nodded, her mind racing. "I know. I've never felt so certain about anything in my life." Jackson smiled, a small but genuine smile. "And that's why we're going to do this, because we believe in it. We believe in a better future." She looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you for being here, Jackson. You've always believed in me, even when I wasn't sure of myself. I don't know what I would have done without you." Jackson placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a quiet but powerful reassurance. "You've always had this strength in you, Lyra. I just helped you see it. Now we have to show the galaxy what it means to fight for what's right." Lyra took a deep breath. The weight of the decision was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy now. She had made her choice. She was ready. Outside, the sounds of the city were louder than usual. The protests, the cries for change, the calls for justice. It was all growing louder with every passing minute. The rebellion had sparked something in the people. They were ready for change. But the Queen, of course, wasn't going to give up control so easily. She had ordered the army to take action, to destroy the uprising before it could gain any real momentum. But the rebels had something the Queen didn't. They had hope. Hope for a future that didn't rely on old power structures and traditions. And Lyra had something else, something her mother didn't understand: the support of the people. Together with Jackson and the leaders of the rebellion, Lyra had already laid the groundwork for the movement. It wasn't just about taking down the Queen's regime. It was about rebuilding the galaxy from the ground up. It was about creating a world where species could coexist, where power was shared, not hoarded. Lyra and Jackson had spent countless hours working with the rebel leaders, organizing protests, rallying support, and carefully planning their next steps. It wasn't going to be easy, and Lyra knew that. The Queen's forces were strong, but Lyra had one thing they didn't: her people's trust. The citizens of the Empire were tired of the old ways. They were ready for change, ready to fight for a better future. At the front of the rebel camp, Lyra stood before the crowd. The space was filled with soldiers, diplomats, and citizens alike, all united under one common cause. She had never seen so many people come together in the name of a single idea. The air was thick with anticipation, and the weight of their expectations pressed down on her. "Today is the day," Lyra began, her voice clear and strong. "Today, we take the first step toward a new future. A future where we all stand as equals. A future where no one is forced to bow to outdated laws and power struggles. A future where the galaxy is united, not divided." The crowd erupted in applause, and Lyra felt her heart swell with pride. She could see it in their eyes. Hope. Hope for a better tomorrow. Jackson stepped up beside her, his eyes full of determination. "The Queen may have the power of the Empire behind her, but we have something stronger, our unity, and together, we can change the galaxy." Lyra glanced at him, her heart full of gratitude. Without him, this moment wouldn't have been possible. He had believed in her when no one else did. He had stood by her, never wavering, even when the future seemed uncertain. And now here they were, ready to face the challenge ahead. "We have a long road ahead of us," Lyra continued, her voice rising over the cheering crowd. "But we are strong, and we will fight for the future we deserve." With that, the rebellion was set in motion. As they prepared to march, Lyra's thoughts turned to her mother. She didn't know what would happen once the battle began. She didn't know if she would ever see the Queen again. But she knew one thing for certain: she had to do this. For herself, for the galaxy, for everyone who had ever believed in change. Jackson stood by her side, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "We'll do this together," he said quietly. Lyra smiled, the weight of the future lifting off her shoulders just a little. Yes, together. The march to the Queen's palace was slow but steady. The streets were filled with people, all chanting for a new era, all calling for change. As they neared the gates, Lyra could see the Queen's guards preparing for battle. The time for diplomacy had passed. There was no going back now. Lyra raised her hand, signaling for the rebels to stop. The crowd grew silent as they waited for her words. "This is it," she said, her voice carrying across the sea of faces. "We stand at the threshold of a new beginning. But we must not let fear or hatred guide us. We are here to bring peace, not to destroy." Her words were met with a powerful roar of agreement. The rebellion wasn't just about overthrowing the Queen. It was about creating something better, something stronger. With one final look at the crowd, Lyra turned to Jackson, her heart filled with hope. Together, they had already begun the change, and now they would finish it.